Hey guys, Mr. Klein here with our second lesson of our chapter on the later Middle Ages. Our first one was on the Crusades. Our next one will be on the later Middle Ages. So right in the middle, we're going to talk about in detail the Catholic Church and its connections and deep way it dealt with secular government and things like that. So let's go ahead and let's get started. In the early Middle Ages, in the aftermath of Viking attacks and stuff, great nobles and knights held most of the political power in Europe because the kings couldn't protect their lands. As time passes on in the Middle Ages and the Crusades happen and things like that, this power began to coalesce or come together into two types of leaders. First were kings who ruled their kingdoms, and the other one was the Pope, or the popes, and they were the heads of the Roman Catholic Church. And so we're going to talk about the kings and popes and the way they conflicted with each other in the Roman Catholic Church over control over Europe. Now, at this time, just about everybody in Europe was Christian, and people believed that the Pope was God's representative on earth. It would be as though they believed that the Pope and God would sit down at like the coffee shop and they would talk about what God wanted the Pope to do for the day. And he would give him a list of things to do and the Pope would go ahead and do it. That kind of representative. And it was his duty as the Pope to decide what the church should teach. And that in theory, the Pope was supposed to pray often and get messages from God in order to pass to the people. These messages, or what the church was supposed to teach, was done through the writing of a letter called a papal bull. No, not bull as in a cow, but it's a homonym of the word, of course. Okay, so the Pope wrote letters called bulls that would give information about what needed to be taught. The Pope also had to ensure that people obeyed the church teachings. He couldn't have people running around saying that he said something when it wasn't what he said, or people saying things that was against church teachings. Now, you could get in trouble, you could go in front of church discipline and things like that, but if things were bad enough, the Pope had a special power that he said he had, and if someone obeyed the church greatly, the Pope could excommunicate them or cut them off, essentially saying they couldn't go to heaven. The idea of excommunication was that you couldn't receive rights in the church, and as a result, your sins couldn't be forgiven, which if you remember for Christianity, if you have sin and you die, you go straight to hell. And for Catholics who believe in purgatory, excommunication meant that you couldn't be prayed out of purgatory either. So if you were somehow good enough even to get into purgatory, you'd be stuck there for eternity if you were excommunicated. So, that power will be used later on in our lesson. I just wanted to keep you in mind about that. Now, in the 1000s, about 1,000 years ago, one of the largest kingdoms in Europe was not England or France or anything like that. It was the Holy Roman Empire, which if you remember that term when we talk about Charlemagne, it was the Frankish Empire. It was considered to be the successor of the Roman Empire. But in fact, the Holy Roman Empire wasn't even in Rome. It was actually here in Germany. And this entire preschool painting-looking splotch on the map of Europe was the Holy Roman Empire. It was a whole bunch of small kingdoms, dukedoms, duchies, baroniges, you name it. All of these were under the rule of the Holy Roman Emperor. And the thing is, he wasn't even an emperor either. He was actually elected by a group of kings and nobles throughout this group. Some of these were no bigger than the size of a 2,000 or 3,000 person town, but you had a duke or a baron or a lord ruling it, and he had, through ancestral rights, the right to elect the king. And like I said, the Holy Roman Empire received its power through the Pope. The Pope confirmed who would ever be in charge. And unlike England and France, where whoever was king died and his son would take over as king, the Holy Roman Emperor was elected through nobles. And if there was ever a disagreement over who would be the Holy Roman Emperor, the Pope's job was to decide. He was like the tiebreaker, if you will. So what would usually happen is people would agree on, the Pope would say who he wanted to be emperor, and the nobles would vote. But sometimes you had differences. And this was the crown of the Holy Roman Emperor. Pretty fancy, I must say. And that the Holy Roman Empire essentially lasted from Charlemagne in the 800s until the 1800s. So for about 1,000 years, the Holy Roman Empire existed in one form or another during this time, thus setting the stage for a big clash between authority on earth and our heavenly authority. The biggest issue between popes and kings was over the king's right, especially in the Holy Roman Empire, to select bishops for their kingdom. And just to reiterate or review what was the power of the church, the Pope was the head of the church. Below him were cardinals, archbishops, and bishops in that order. Cardinals were the highest all the way down. Archbishops and bishops and even some cardinals were attached to the cathedrals, but ones who were who were from royal families or noble families acted as advisors to the king and did little church work. Below the bishops, you had your parish priests who were in charge of your individual churches. They helped the villagers. You had monks and nuns who helped the community, and friars who were kind of like missionary monks, went around preaching the good news of the gospel and helping out the poor wherever they needed. So these bishops, these guys right here, proved to be the key. The Holy Roman Emperor and Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII got in a big argument over a bishop that Henry IV chose. And Henry IV was the head of the Holy Roman Empire. And here's him whenever he gives up his crown to Henry V on the right. This is a medieval drawing of them. And so Henry, because the Pope received his power mainly through political connections in the Holy Roman Empire, King Henry IV decided, well, you know what, if you're going to disagree over who I'm going to have as bishops, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and get you removed from office. And he tried to get Gregory kicked out of office. But Gregory, this guy right here, Pope Gregory VII, decided to use this trump card that I mentioned earlier. And Gregory, as a result of this, excommunicated him. Now, because the Catholic Church was so strong and everybody believed so much in Christianity, Henry IV, promptly after being excommunicated, begged forgiveness, not only to remain in power, but if he died, to actually go to heaven. And Gregory VII, not only being a pope, but also being shrewd enough to realize that he had won this particular battle, decided to remove the excommunication, and Henry IV could now go to church again. Now, this set the stage for a compromise which happened after both men died. And during this time, King Henry IV actually invaded Italy twice and tried to kill Gregory VII. But after they died, a compromise was made where the Pope appointed religious officials. After all, he was in charge of the church. He should be able to choose officials, which was what the Pope was saying all along. But the compromise meant that all religious officials, the buck stopped with the emperor or the king of their kingdom. So in other words, you could be picked by the Pope, but you had to do what the emperor had to say, which they saw was a good division of power. So why was this such a big deal? Why did people listen to the church so much? Well, it's because the clergy or the church officials were very, very influential in medieval European culture and politics. Remember, your average person had no education, and the only time they heard anything that went on outside of the manor and the feudal system was during the local church service. The most educated person in the manor was the Catholic priest, because he received a little bit of training. He could read the Bible, but that was pretty much it. The life of your average person revolved around the local church, with ceremonies like baptisms of babies, weddings, and journeys to religious locations every once in a while called a pilgrimage would take place. If a miracle would happen in some place, peasants would beg their manor lord to allow them to go and pray, and hopefully they could get a miracle as well. The Catholic Church owned a whole lot of land in Europe, because many people wanted to go to heaven, and they figured when they died, what little possessions they had, they should give to the church in order for the church to do its job, but also get approval to go to heaven. So because it had so much land, the church had to parcel it out, and they ended up having to rule it like a feudal lord, where you had bishops and you had archbishops and you had cardinals ruling over land that was given to them by the church. And like I said, priests and bishops often became political advisors to rulers because they were educated, they were well read, and things like that they should be listened to. And this is a picture of your average Roman Catholic priest. He had his Bible there, and he's listening to confessional of a peasant confessing his sins to him as a priest. Now, the thing about the church is it held a lot of political power, and it also held all of the intellectual power. If you notice what I've keep on saying when I talk about the medieval church and medieval Europe, the only people who could read were members of the church. Okay, and as a result, the first universities, the first schools, the first learning was all involved with the church because it all had to do with learning about God. And the first universities were built by the church themselves. oldest active serving university is the University of Bologna in Italy. And here we are, students there. They were there to learn religious teachings, such as religion, like I said, the law, medicine, and even philosophy, the idea of thinking and why does the world exist and why does life exist and things like that were taught in these universities. The world's second oldest institution, it's still open, is Oxford University in England. And a little bit later than that is its quote-unquote rival, Cambridge. So Oxford and Cambridge are two of the world's oldest universities. They're not just prestigious, but they were also based on religious teachings and stuff too. And so this is Balliol College here, one of the oldest colleges at Oxford University, and this building has been around since about the 1300s, from the medieval period. So Oxford and University of Bologna, the University of Paris, Cambridge, places like that have a long history dating back to the Middle Ages. In these universities, people sought to establish a connection between religious faith and intellectual reason. In other words, to the people studying in these universities, and most of them were very wealthy, they were the children of nobles, they sought to connect the idea of faith, of religious ideas, with thinking. And the most famous scholar to do this was a Franciscan monk by the name of St. Thomas Aquinas. And St. Thomas Aquinas was a Christian thinker who developed a system of philosophy called natural law, or Thomism, to show that God didn't just exist. He sought to say that, you know what, God is real, not just because we believe it, because there's reasons. And that the idea is that God exists, and he established the universe in a way to show that he exists and in order to run an order. And what we have right here is a picture of St. Thomas Aquinas. And Thomism and some of these ideas are still really influential in Catholic thinking and even in Protestant thinking. And even in educational circles, mainly through Catholic schools and some traditional Protestant schools, the idea of natural law. And it still remains a very important philosophical idea today. Now, the greatest architectural achievements of medieval Europe were actually the creation of Gothic cathedrals. So it wasn't just great to have a church. You needed to have a big church. A big church like this, like Notre Dame de Paris in France. This is Notre Dame, the famous cathedral here, the cathedral spire, and the columns here. Great architectural that takes hundreds of years to be built. And the idea of these cathedrals was to build these huge, open, tall structures to show how people become closer to God. That the idea was that these buildings would rise so high up and the ceilings on the inside would be so high to make you look up toward God. Like I said, these buildings took hundreds of years to be built and included details such as these gargoyles here, which were used to ward off evil spirits and demons. And all of this was hand-built, handcrafted by artisans over the course of hundreds of years. And they're still around today. In fact, one of the oldest Gothic cathedrals is actually in Germany, at the Cathedral of Aachen in western Germany, right near the French border. At the Aachen Cathedral, it's important in European history because here was where Charlemagne was crowned the first Holy Roman Emperor. And the building was badly damaged during World War II, but it was rebuilt. But the Gothic idea of spires and points and things of these long, upward-looking architectural features, once again, was the idea that people would look at it and they would look toward the heavens and they could see God, and it would cause them to pray and become closer to God. So, let's wrap up this lesson. At the Middle Ages, you had a struggle between the political ideas and religious ideas, between popes and kings. The popes had their trump card, which is the idea of excommunication, or kicking someone out of the church and preventing them from going to heaven. This proved pretty useful when dealing with the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, a collection of kingdoms and dukes, duchies and stuff in Central Europe. It all came to a head when Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII argued over who would be bishops in Henry IV's kingdom. Henry tried to kick out Gregory as pope. Gregory excommunicated Henry IV, who then promptly begged for forgiveness. This was just one example of how much the Roman Catholic Church controlled European life, where everything was connected to the church, all the way down to the local parish priest, who in their local towns and villages was the only educated person there, most likely. And they got their education through universities, such as Balliol College at Oxford University in England. And in these universities, students learned to try to make the connection between faith and intellectual reason. The most famous of these thinkers to try and connect this was St. Thomas Aquinas, whose ideas of natural law said that God didn't just exist, but he created the universe to show his existence and understand order in the universe. The final major idea of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, the idea of the cathedral. These huge churches in large cities were designed to be huge areas where church business took place, but also people could come and worship. And their intricate detail was built over several hundred years. And the whole Gothic architectural style looks toward the user or the person looking at the building to look toward heaven and cause them to pray to become closer to God. So there you go. That's the lesson on the Catholic Church. We've got one more lesson on the later Middle Ages, including the 100 Years' War that actually lasted over 100 years, and the Black Death, which set in motion the downfall of the Middle Ages. So, as always, if you have any questions, please let me know, and thanks for watching.